Hey guys, tonight we float quietly on a dark ocean that barely ripples, the hull of a waka gliding beneath you like a patient animal that already knows the way. You're standing barefoot on planks warmed earlier by the sun, toes curling slightly as the swell lifts and lowers you, and above your head the sky opens into a slow, sparkling map that doesn't bother to label itself. You breathe in salt and damp wood and realize with a gentle chuckle that if you dropped your phone right now, it would be instantly useless. No signal, no battery-saving mode, no comforting blue dot. This is one of those "you probably won't survive this" situations if you arrive unprepared, mostly because the ocean does not care how confident you feel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, post your location and local time down in the comments. It's always oddly soothing to see how far these stories drift. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're traveling as Maori navigators once did, not by lines on paper, but by relationships between stars, waves, birds, and memory. The waka beneath you isn't just transportation, it's a thinking platform. Mainstream history agrees that Polynesian ancestors of the Maoris settled Aotearoa centuries ago using deliberate ocean navigation, not accidental drifting. That's the solid fact everyone nods along to. What's less obvious is how calm the process feels when done correctly. You're not racing the sea, you're listening to it. You shift your weight, feel the canoe answer, and already your body is quietly storing information your brain hasn't named yet. Look up. The stars aren't decoration. You're reading them the way other cultures read clocks. Certain stars rise and set at predictable points on the horizon, forming what navigators call star paths. You don't need to name them out loud, you just know that when that particular cluster lifts itself from the sea's edge, your bow should point a certain way. Historians still argue whether Maori navigators used a fully formalized star compass, like some other Polynesian groups, or whether their system was more flexible and locally adapted, but everyone agrees the sky mattered deeply. You track movement rather than position because motion is easier to feel when you're slightly tired, and the night is doing its best to lull you into forgetting where you are. There's a gentle joke here if you let yourself smile. While modern travelers panic when their GPS recalculates, you're calmly recalculating with the universe. No rerouting notification, just a subtle adjustment of your stance. Somewhere behind you, someone hums a low chant, not for ceremony, but for rhythm. Quirky tidbit time, those chants often double as memory aids, encoding routes, star sequences, and expected conditions. It's like a playlist that also happens to be a map, which frankly puts most road trip playlists to shame. The ocean itself keeps talking. You feel long, slow swells rolling under the waka from one direction, while smaller, sharper waves cut across them. This intersection tells you more than sight ever could. Even with clouds hiding the stars, your legs and hips register patterns. You don't analyze them, you absorb them. Scholars still debate how consciously navigators processed this information, whether they actively thought this swell means that direction, or whether it lived deeper as trained instinct. But either way, your body is doing a lot of quiet math right now. Every so often, you glance toward the horizon, not expecting to see land, but checking how darkness behaves. Is it thicker in one direction? Does the sky reflect a faint, pale glow? These are small clues, almost unfairly subtle. And yes, there's humor in imagining someone today squinting at the horizon and confidently announcing nothing at all, while you nod and say, "Exactly." You probably won't survive this if you need obvious signs. The waka creaks softly, wood flexing with water. That sound is comforting. It tells you the craft is alive in its own way. Traditional waka were engineered with deep understanding of balance and load,
a fact mainstream archaeology backs up through surviving designs and oral histories. A fringe tidbit whispers alongside that fact. Some navigators claimed they could feel when a waka was happy with its course, a sensation more emotional than technical. Historians still argue whether that's metaphor or a genuine tactile feedback loop between hull and sea, but out here, under stars that don't rush, the difference barely matters. Time stretches. Without clocks, you mark it by bodily cues, the cooling air, the ache in your calves, the way certain stars climb higher. You're awake, but only just. This is the sweet spot where learning happens without stress. Another light joke floats by. Productivity gurus would hate this method. No schedules, no alarms, just you trusting that arrival will happen when it happens. A bird crosses overhead, a dark shape against darker sky. You note its direction without drama. Birds matter more in daylight, but even now they register as hints of life patterns beyond your boat. The memory of their flight tucks itself away for later when the sun returns. You're already building tomorrow's understanding tonight, which feels like cheating in the nicest way. As the night deepens, you realize something quietly profound. Navigation here isn't about conquering distance, it's about maintaining alignment. With the waka, with the sky, with the sea, with stories passed down so long they've worn smooth. You breathe out, let your shoulders drop, and allow yourself to be guided. The stars continue their slow march, and you follow, not because you're forcing the journey, but because you remember it, maybe from a chant, maybe from a feeling, maybe from a body that knows more than it says.
You don't pull out a chart because there isn't one. Instead, you reach inward to a place where sound, image, and movement are stored together, tangled like fishing line that somehow never knots. This is where the map lives. Memory isn't a backup system here. It's the primary tool. You shift your feet again, feeling that same long swell you noticed earlier, and the motion nudges a chant into your mind. Not loudly, nothing so rude. It arrives like a half-remembered song you didn't know you knew. And as it unfolds, distances and directions quietly line themselves up. Mainstream history is clear on one thing. Maori navigation relied heavily on oral tradition. Routes, seasonal cues, and ocean behavior were passed down through carefully structured stories and chants. These weren't bedtime tales meant to drift off into nonsense. They were precision instruments disguised as poetry. Each phrase anchored a sequence: stars to watch, swells to expect, birds that should appear if you're on track. You recite internally, not because anyone told you to memorize, but because repetition has made it impossible not to. It's muscle memory for the mind. You notice how the chant has a rhythm that matches the canoe's movement. That's not accidental. Quirky tidbit time. Many navigational chants are paced to match paddling strokes or wave intervals, turning the body into a metronome. It's like your favorite workout playlist, except instead of motivating you to do squats, it prevents you from sailing past an island and having a very awkward "are we lost?" meeting at sea. Light joke number one, because even ancient systems deserve one. As you continue, images stack gently behind your eyes. You picture an island profile, not as a drawing, but as a feeling of rising land after too much horizon. You remember how clouds behave when they hover above trees, how their undersides flatten or glow faintly. None of this is written down, which would make modern bureaucrats deeply uncomfortable. But here's the thing: memory thrives when it's lived. Each journey refreshes the map, smoothing errors, reinforcing what works. You don't just remember routes, you remember remembering them. Historians still argue whether these memory systems functioned more like fixed scripts or flexible frameworks. Did navigators repeat exact chants unchanged for generations, or did they adapt wording as routes shifted and environments changed? Standing here with salt drying on your skin, the debate feels almost beside the point. You can feel adaptability built into the method. If a swell arrives early, the chant doesn't break, it bends. That flexibility might be the real genius. You catch yourself smiling at a strange thought. If someone asked you for directions right now, you'd probably sing at them. That's joke number 2, and honestly, not far from the truth. Directions here are musical, spatial, emotional. There's no turn left in 200 meters because meters don't exist. There's when that star kisses the sea, let the canoe breathe a little east. Try putting that into a navigation app. The memory map also includes warnings. Certain verses tighten your chest slightly, reminding you of reefs, tricky currents, or places where the sea behaves like it's in a bad mood. These aren't fear-based alarms, they're respectful acknowledgments. The ocean has moods, and your elders taught you to remember them. Mainstream anthropology notes that this knowledge was often restricted. Only those trained and trusted were given full access to navigational lore. It wasn't secrecy for power's sake, it was quality control. One forgotten line could mean a very long, very quiet drift. As the night moves on, fatigue tries to blur the edges of your thoughts. This is where memory proves its worth. You don't need to stay sharply awake. The chant carries you, looping back on itself, reinforcing key points. It's soothing, almost hypnotic, which is convenient because panic is the enemy of recall. You remember that from earlier, alignment over conquest. Same rule applies to the mind. Force it and it slips. Relax it and it performs. Here comes joke number 3, drifting in like flotsam. Modern students cramming for exams would love this method. No highlighters, just vibes and waves. But jokes aside, the training behind this calm is intense. Years of observation, correction, and repetition shaped this mental map. You learned as a child by listening, then by doing small parts of a journey, gradually trusted with more. That's another mainstream fact supported by oral histories. Navigational knowledge was scaffolded carefully over time. You test yourself quietly. Without looking up, you try to recall which star should be approaching its highest point. Your body answers before your brain forms words. There's a subtle easing of tension in your shoulders as you realize you're on course. Memory here isn't a dusty archive, it's an active conversation between past experience and present sensation. There's also room for personal variation. Some navigators favored visual memory, strong mental images of skies and seas. Others leaned into auditory patterns, chants nested inside chants, like those Russian dolls you've maybe seen on a shelf somewhere. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some accounts describe navigators composing new verses after successful voyages, adding them to the tradition like patch notes after a software update. Joke number 4, because yes, this is versioning, just without the bugs. Historians still argue whether all Maori groups used identical memory techniques or whether methods varied significantly between regions. Geography suggests variation makes sense. Different coastlines, different currents, different bird behaviors. Memory adapts to place, and place, in turn, shapes memory. You feel that now as the air cools slightly, hinting at a shift in wind. The chant accommodates it, emphasizing a line you hadn't focused on earlier. That's not coincidence, that's design. Your mind wanders briefly, the way it does when you're relaxed, but not asleep. You think about how fragile this system might seem to outsiders. One generation forgetting and everything's gone, right? Except it didn't vanish. It persisted for centuries, which suggests robustness. Memory, when social and embodied, can be surprisingly durable. That's a comforting thought as your eyelids grow heavier. Joke number 5 drifts in softly. Imagine trying to explain this to a spreadsheet. Cells would weep. But spreadsheets don't sway with waves, and they don't listen to birds. You do. You feel the waka respond to a tiny adjustment, and the chant settles again. No alarms, no recalculating voice, just continuity. As dawn edges closer, still hidden but felt, you understand something subtle. Memory here isn't about the past, it's about anticipation. Each remembered cue prepares you for what's about to happen, not what already did. The map is forward-facing, always leaning into the next swell, the next star rise, the next breath of wind. You're not recalling, you're aligning.
You let the chant fade into a hum, trusting that it will resurface when needed. The ocean keeps rocking you, steady and patient. Somewhere ahead, land waits without announcing itself. And within you, a map continues to redraw itself, not in ink, but in rhythm and image and calm confidence. You stay with that feeling, balanced between knowing and letting go, which, if we're being honest, is probably the best navigation advice anyone ever came up with.
Your attention drifts upward, just as a shape cuts across the dim sky. It's not dramatic, no triumphant music cue, no slow-motion wing beat, just a bird doing what birds do, which is exactly why you care. You follow its path with the lazy precision of someone who has been taught that nothing in nature wastes energy. If it's flying that way, there's probably a reason. You store the angle, the height, the confidence of its movement. Birds, after all, have appointments with land. Mainstream historical understanding agrees that Polynesian navigators, including Maori ancestors, used seabird behavior as a reliable indicator of proximity to land. Certain birds forage far out to sea by day, but must return to land to rest at night. You don't need to know their Latin names, you just need to recognize patterns. When a bird flies out at dawn and returns at dusk on the same bearing, it's quietly drawing you an invisible line back to shore. It's like having a guide who never speaks and never asks for snacks. You adjust your posture slightly, keeping the waka steady. Birds are easier to read when you're calm. Quirky tidbit time, some navigators claimed they could distinguish between a bird heading home and one just out for a casual cruise, based on wing rhythm and urgency. That might sound suspiciously poetic, but anyone who's watched pigeons versus seagulls for more than 5 minutes knows there's a difference. Light joke number 1, even birds have "I forgot my keys" energy versus "I'm late for work" energy. The sun is higher now, turning the sea into a textured field of blues and silvers. This is when birds really shine as navigational cues. You spot another one skimming low, dipping its beak, then climbing. Feeding behavior, likely far from land. You log that mentally, pairing it with the earlier bird that flew with purpose. Memory is doing its quiet filing again, cross-referencing wing beats with chants you half hear in your head. Historians still argue whether bird navigation was primary or supplementary. Did navigators rely on birds only when other cues failed, or were birds integral from the start? Standing here, you suspect the answer is both. Systems like this don't rank information, they layer it. Stars, swells, birds, clouds, all voices in the same calm conversation. If one goes quiet, the others keep talking. You squint toward the horizon. There's a faint smudge of cloud that doesn't quite behave like the rest. It's taller, more stubborn, lingering in one spot. Birds tend to gather near such places, not out of aesthetic appreciation, but because land changes airflow, moisture, and food availability. You remember being taught that birds are honest. They don't bluff. If they circle, something's there. Joke number 2 floats by. If only human directions were that reliable. A small group of birds appears now, moving in loose formation, not a flock exactly, more like acquaintances traveling in the same general direction. You note their path. Group movement often suggests a shared destination, and shared destinations usually involve land. This isn't guesswork, it's pattern recognition trained over years. Mainstream ethnographic accounts describe navigators learning bird habits from childhood, long before they ever set foot on an open ocean waka. By the time you're here, it feels obvious, like noticing smoke before fire. There's also restraint in how you use this information. You don't spin the canoe dramatically every time a bird flaps. Overreaction is the fastest way to lose trust in your cues. Instead, you wait for confirmation. Another bird, similar direction, then another. Your confidence builds quietly, like a cat deciding whether to sit on your lap, slow, deliberate, and impossible to rush. Joke number 3, because yes, that's exactly the energy. A fringe tidbit slips in gently. Some oral traditions mention navigators releasing captive birds to see which direction they fly, using that as a clue to nearby land. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or symbolic storytelling layered onto practical knowledge. Either way, the idea lingers. You imagine the bird bursting into the sky, immediately choosing a direction with absolute certainty, while you nod appreciatively, pretending you weren't anxious 2 seconds ago. The sea breeze carries faint smells now. Nothing obvious, just a hint of something vegetable, maybe damp earth. Birds often detect these cues long before humans do, which is why their behavior shifts first. You inhale slowly, not forcing meaning onto the scent. This isn't about decoding everything at once. It's about letting evidence accumulate until the conclusion feels inevitable. You notice how relaxed you are about all this. There's no ticking clock, no deadline. The birds don't hurry you. They simply demonstrate that land exists somewhere ahead, which frankly is all you really need to know. Arrival will happen when alignment is maintained. That lesson keeps repeating, like a refrain. As the day warms, birds become more active, darting, calling, occasionally arguing mid-air over food. You smile at that. Even navigational aids have opinions. You log another mental note. Birds heading inland mid-morning are strong indicators. You don't announce it. You just feel a subtle rightness settle in your chest. Historians still debate the exact distances birds can reliably indicate. Some estimates suggest land within 30 miles, others argue for much farther. Out here, those numbers don't matter. What matters is direction and trend. The waka continues on its steady course, guided by a conversation between sky, sea, and wings. You let your gaze soften, watching birds without staring. The rhythm of their appearance becomes part of the journey's soundtrack, like the creak of wood or the hush of water along the hull. Your eyelids grow heavier, but awareness stays intact. This is navigation designed for humans who get tired, who blink, who dream state. Another bird passes overhead, close enough that you hear the rush of air through feathers. It heads the same way as before. You don't need to mark it. It's already marked you. With a quiet exhale, you lean into the motion of the waka, trusting that wings know where solid ground waits. And for now, that trust is more than enough.
You stop looking quite so much and start feeling instead. This is the part that surprises people who think navigation is all about sharp eyes and sharp minds. Your feet, knees, hips, these are listening now. The waka rises and falls in a long, patient rhythm, and beneath that rhythm you sense another, slightly offset, like 2 slow heartbeats that refuse to sync. That's the ocean speaking in layers. Swells arrive from different storms, different distances, and they keep their direction long after winds forget why they started. You let your body become the notebook. Mainstream oceanography backs this up in a way that feels oddly validating. Long-period swells can travel thousands of kilometers with minimal loss of direction. Polynesian navigators, including Maori ancestors, used these swells as stable directional references. You don't need to know the math, you just need to notice that one swell feels deeper, slower, more confident, while another is shorter and fussier. You align with the confident one. It's like choosing which conversation at a party to follow. The calm voice usually knows where it's going. You widen your stance slightly, knees soft, letting the motion pass through you instead of knocking you off balance. Quirky tidbit time. Experienced navigators could reportedly identify up to 3 distinct swell directions simultaneously. 3. Most people struggle to identify 3 items on a grocery list without checking their phone. Joke number 1 floats by gently and then drifts away. You remember being taught not to fight the movement. If you tense, everything blurs. If you relax, patterns emerge. The waka's hull amplifies the swells, translating invisible energy into something you can feel in your bones. This is why navigation happens standing up. Sitting dulls the signal. Lying down, while tempting, is strongly discouraged, unless you enjoy drifting aimlessly and explaining yourself later. Historians still argue whether swell navigation was consciously analyzed, this swell means east, or whether it functioned as embodied knowledge learned through long exposure. Out here, the debate feels academic in the nicest possible way. Your body knows what to do without narrating it. The longer swell presses against your left foot more insistently. You make a tiny adjustment. The pressure evens out. That's the answer. You smile at the absurdity of it. No instruments, no numbers, just vibes and physics. Joke number 2, because yes, this is the most respectable use of the word vibes you'll ever encounter. And it works. The waka settles, the creaking wood approving of your choice, or at least not disapproving, which in boat terms is a win. The ocean's surface tells stories too. You notice lines of ripples crossing at angles, creating diamond patterns that slide past the hull. These aren't random. They're the visible signatures of underlying swells. You trace them with your eyes for a moment, then let your gaze soften again. Too much looking can interfere with feeling. This is counterintuitive, especially if you're used to screens demanding constant attention. Here, less focus gives you more information. There's a moment when a larger swell lifts the waka higher than usual. Your stomach floats slightly, that familiar gentle lurch. You don't panic. You file it away. Larger swell, same direction. Good. That consistency is comforting. It means the storm that birthed it is far away and not your problem. You appreciate distant problems. They're polite like that. A fringe tidbit drifts in with the swell. Some navigators described swells as having personalities, even names, associated with specific routes or seasons. Historians still argue whether this was metaphorical teaching language or literal belief. Either way, it's effective. It's easier to remember a stubborn winter swell than a vector angle. Memory loves stories. You think back to those chants from earlier and realize how neatly this all fits together. Your legs start to ache a little. That's fine. Discomfort sharpens awareness without demanding action. You shift your weight again, testing. The waka responds immediately, confirming you're still aligned. You breathe out slowly. There's humor in how small the adjustments are. Millimeters matter more than grand gestures. Joke number 3 glides through. Dramatic course corrections are for movies, not oceans. Clouds pass overhead, briefly dimming the sun. For a moment, visual cues drop away, and the swells become even more important. You're grateful for them. They don't flicker or disappear. They keep arriving, dependable as a metronome set by the planet itself. Mainstream maritime studies note that swell direction remains consistent even under cloud cover, making it invaluable for navigation when stars or land aren't visible. You nod internally, as if agreeing with a lecture you're half asleep through. You test yourself again, closing your eyes for a few seconds. The waka continues forward. You feel the dominant swell clearly now, a long roll that lifts your right side just a fraction before the left. You open your eyes, confirm nothing alarming has happened, and allow yourself a small, satisfied smile. This is trust built through repetition, not blind faith. Historians still argue how this knowledge was taught without overwhelming learners. How do you explain something that's felt, not seen? Accounts suggest long apprenticeships where novices stood in canoes simply feeling swells without responsibility for direction. Years of that. Imagine a modern syllabus that says, stand here and vibe with the ocean until it makes sense. Joke number 4, but also kind of wonderful. The wind shifts slightly, ruffling the water's surface. Shorter waves begin to dance atop the deeper swell. You ignore them. Wind waves are chatty, easily distracted. The deep swell is the one that traveled, the one with commitment issues resolved long ago. You stick with it. This hierarchy of information, deep over shallow, slow over fast, keeps you oriented without effort. Your breathing syncs with the motion now. Inhale as the bow lifts, exhale as it settles. This wasn't taught explicitly, it just happens. The waka feels steadier, and so do you. It's almost meditative, which is convenient, because tension would only muddy the signal.
Sleepiness brushes the edges of your awareness, but you stay present enough to feel the next swell arrive. Another subtle joke surfaces. This is the only time going with the flow is both literal and highly technical. You let it pass, smiling inwardly. The sea doesn't mind jokes as long as you keep listening. You recall earlier sections, the stars, the chants, the birds, and realize how swells tie them together. Stars give you orientation, memory gives you context, birds give you confirmation, and swells give you continuity. They're always there, day and night, whispering direction through motion. You feel a quiet gratitude for that reliability. As the hours slide by, the ache in your legs deepens, then fades into a dull background hum. Your body has adapted. The swells feel clearer now, not because they changed, but because you did. That's another mainstream observation from experiential learning studies. Perception sharpens with exposure. You don't gain new senses, you refine existing ones. Historians still argue about the limits of swell navigation. How far, how precise, how universal. Out here, those arguments dissolve into practice. Precision doesn't mean hitting a pinpoint, it means staying aligned long enough for land to eventually rise to meet you. The ocean is wide, but it's not infinite. Direction plus patience equals arrival. You roll your shoulders gently, easing tension. The waka glides on, obedient to physics and tradition alike. You're not thinking in sentences anymore. You're thinking in motion, in pressure, in rhythm. That's okay. Thinking less is part of the method. Another swell passes, familiar now, like an old friend who doesn't need conversation. You let yourself relax into that familiarity, trusting that when a change matters, you'll feel it. Until then, there's nothing to do but stand, breathe, and listen with your whole body. The sea keeps talking. You keep listening. And somewhere ahead, without hurrying, land waits.
You lift your head again, not sharply, just enough to let your eyes take in the wider scene. The sky has shifted while you were busy listening with your legs. Clouds have gathered in loose stacks on the horizon, their bases flatter than the others, their tops puffed up like they've found something interesting to hover over. You don't stare, you glance, the way you'd glance at a clock you already trust. Clouds, like birds, don't gather without reason. Mainstream meteorology quietly supports what navigators learned by experience. Land affects cloud formation. Warm air rises over islands, moisture condenses, and clouds tend to linger above forests and hills. You file this under useful but not flashy. You've been taught that flashy cues are unreliable. Subtle consistency is where the truth lives. That cloud stack has been there longer than the rest. You keep it in mind without committing to anything dramatic. The color of the sea changes too, almost imperceptibly. Blues soften, then deepen again, with faint greenish hints appearing when the light hits at a certain angle. You remember being told that shallow waters reflect light differently, especially near reefs or sandy bottoms. Quirky tidbit time, some navigators claimed they could sense nearby land by the mood of the water's color alone, even when depth changes were minimal. Historians still argue whether this was genuine perception or poetic exaggeration, but standing here, you admit the ocean does feel different, less endless, more textured. A breeze drifts across the deck, carrying something faint but unmistakable. It's not strong enough to name outright, but it nudges a memory awake. Vegetation has a smell, even diluted across miles of open water. Damp leaves, soil, life doing its quiet photosynthesis thing. You inhale slowly, letting the scent pass without chasing it. Smell is persuasive but sneaky. You want corroboration. You glance back to the clouds, still there. The swells remain consistent. Birds earlier flew with purpose in this general direction, layers aligning. That's how conclusions form out here, not with certainty, but with comfort. You feel a gentle settling in your chest, the same feeling you get when you realize you didn't forget your keys after all. Joke number 1 slips in.
Modern navigation apps could learn from this. No alerts, just a warm sense of, yes, this seems right. You smile and let it go. Humor, like tension, should pass through without sticking. You notice debris now, tiny bits of plant matter drifting by, almost apologetically. Nothing dramatic, just a leaf fragment, maybe a small stick. Mainstream maritime accounts confirm that floating vegetation can indicate proximity to land, especially when combined with other cues. Alone, it means nothing. Together, it's a whisper growing louder. You don't reach for it, you just acknowledge it and keep going. Historians still debate how much weight navigators gave to smell compared to sight and motion. Smell is harder to teach, harder to standardize, but that doesn't make it useless. You've learned that teaching here often happens indirectly. Notice this, elders might say, without explaining why. Years later, your body supplies the reason. The air feels slightly warmer now, or maybe that's just the sun climbing. You roll your shoulders, easing a knot you hadn't noticed forming. Clouds continue to hold their position, casting faint shadows that darken the water beneath them. You trace one shadow with your eyes, watching how it moves slower than the waves. Land-anchored phenomena tend to do that. They loiter. Joke number 2 drifts by lazily. Clouds hovering like indecisive shoppers, not quite ready to leave. You let the image fade. The important thing is that they're still there. You remember a teaching from long ago. Never rely on a single sign. The ocean loves coincidences. 1 sign is a rumor. 3 is a conversation. 4 is a plan. Right now, you have stars remembered from the night, swells steady underfoot, birds earlier in agreement, clouds lingering ahead, and a faint vegetal scent riding the breeze. That's more than enough to keep going without doubt. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some traditions speak of island shadows reflected in the sky long before land is visible, a subtle darkening or glow that experienced eyes can spot. Historians still argue whether this is optical reality or narrative metaphor. You don't care. The horizon does look slightly different there, heavier somehow. Whether physics or poetry, the result is the same. You stay the course. You adjust your stance again, a small shift to stay aligned with the swell. The waka responds, content. You've learned to read its reactions as part of the environment. Boats communicate through resistance and ease. This one feels easy, which you take as quiet approval. Your thoughts slow. There's no checklist to complete, no milestone to announce. Navigation like this unfolds at the pace of patience. You find that comforting. The modern habit of constant progress tracking would feel rude here, like tapping your watch while someone tells a long story. Historians still debate how often navigators corrected course based on these softer cues versus sticking rigidly to star paths. Out here, rigidity feels the wrong word. It's more like conversation. You listen, you respond, you listen again. Nothing is forced. The sun edges higher, warming your skin. The smell returns briefly, a little stronger this time, then fades. You don't chase it. Chasing leads to overcorrection. You've learned that already, whether or not anyone spelled it out for you. Another small piece of driftwood passes by, rotating slowly. You watch it until it disappears behind the waka. Joke number 3 floats in and out. If the ocean wanted you to rush, it would shove you. Instead, it's gently nudging. You appreciate that. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with salt air and something greener underneath. Your eyelids feel heavy, but awareness stays soft and present. This is the state these methods were designed for: alert without tension, calm without carelessness. Ahead, the clouds persist. The watercolor subtly shifts again. Nothing announces itself yet. That's fine. Arrival doesn't need an announcement. For now, you keep standing, breathing, and letting small signs accumulate into quiet confidence. The map continues to draw itself around you, not on paper, but in air, water, and the slow certainty that comes from paying attention without hurrying.
You realize something gently amusing as the hours stretch on. You still haven't touched a single tool. No compass swinging nervously, no marked stick, no scratched symbols on wood. Your hands are free, doing what hands do best, resting, adjusting, steadying. Navigation here happens without objects, which feels almost rebellious in a world that loves gadgets. Instead, your whole body has become the instrument, calibrated through balance, pressure, and rhythm. Mainstream historical research confirms that traditional Maori wayfinding relied on minimal physical tools. The waka itself, the paddle, and sometimes a bailer. That's about it. No maps in the modern sense, no measuring devices. Knowledge lived in people, not things. You feel a small, sleepy satisfaction at that. If you were to drop everything overboard right now, you'd still know where you're going. Joke number 1 drifts by. Try doing that with your phone and see how brave you feel. You shift your weight again, unconsciously compensating for a subtle change in swell. Your feet adjust before you think to tell them to. This is where training reveals itself. Balance isn't just about staying upright, it's about staying receptive. The more relaxed your stance, the clearer the information flows. You've been taught to stand slightly off-center, knees soft, hips loose. Tension blocks data. That lesson applies far beyond boats, but we'll let it stay here for now. Quirky tidbit time. Some navigators reportedly training by standing on moving logs or narrow platforms near shore, learning to read motion without visual cues. It sounds like an ancient balance class, minus the yoga mats and inspirational quotes. Joke number 2 slides in. Downward-facing navigator probably wasn't a thing, but you never know. Historians still argue how much of this skill is teachable versus innate. Is great wayfinding talent something you're born with, or something shaped entirely by environment and practice? Standing here, you suspect it's both. Some people tune in faster, but everyone improves with time. The ocean is a patient teacher, repeating lessons until you stop fighting them. You notice how your breathing has synced with the waka's movement. Inhale as the bow lifts, exhale as it settles. This wasn't assigned homework, it just happened. Breath becomes another instrument, smoothing your balance, keeping you from stiffening. You remember being told that breath reveals distraction. When someone holds it, they're thinking too hard. You smile faintly and keep breathing. The rhythm extends to paddling when paddles are used. Stroke, pause, glide. Stroke, pause, glide. Each pause lets the boat speak. Mainstream accounts of Polynesian voyaging emphasize this rhythm, noting how over-paddling wastes energy and drowns out feedback from the sea. You imagine someone frantically paddling non-stop, missing every cue, and quietly shake your head. Joke number 3 floats past. Sometimes doing less is the advanced technique. Your eyes half closed now, not asleep, just unfocused. This actually helps. Without sharp visual input, the sensation of motion sharpens. You feel the dominant swell clearly again, steady and reassuring. The waka hums softly, water brushing along its sides. You realize you've entered a state where thinking in words would be inefficient. Sensation is faster. A fringe tidbit rises gently. Some oral traditions suggest navigators could sense land through changes in reflected swell, waves bouncing back subtly from shore, interfering with incoming swells. Historians still debate whether this reflection is detectable at long distances or whether the stories compress multiple cues into one explanation. You don't try to prove it. You simply notice that the swell pattern does feel slightly more complex now, layered in a way it wasn't earlier. Your calves ache again, then fade. Muscles adapt, just like perception. This bodily endurance is part of the method. You can't rush it.
training takes years because the body needs time to rewire its priorities. Balance over force, sensitivity over control. These are slow lessons, which makes them durable. You remember elders correcting posture with gentle taps, not lectures. A hand on the shoulder, a nudge at the hip. Feel that? They'd ask. And you would, eventually. Teaching without over-explaining. Mainstream educational studies might call this experiential learning. Out here, it's just common sense. Historians still argue how standardized these training methods were across different iwi. Geography again suggests variation. Rougher seas demand different balance than calmer waters. You imagine navigators adapting stances subtly depending on region, just as surfers choose boards based on waves. Joke number 4 drifts in. Same sport, very different conditions. You roll your neck slowly, releasing stiffness. The sky has changed again, but you barely register it. Your attention is inward now, tuned to pressure and timing. This inward focus doesn't feel isolating. It feels expansive, as if you're connected through sensation rather than sight. Another swell passes, slightly angled. You adjust. The waka answers. That feedback loop is instant and satisfying. No delay, no buffering. You think about how rare that is in modern life and feel a quiet appreciation. You're aware dimly that this way of navigating would terrify someone who needs constant confirmation. There are no progress bars here. No, you are 63% there. Just continued alignment. Historians still debate whether this uncertainty was stressful for novices. You suspect it was, at first. Then it became normal. Humans adapt to whatever they practice. Your eyelids grow heavier again, but you don't slump. Balance keeps you awake enough. This is the sweet spot. Body engaged, mind quiet. The waka glides on, guided by physics, tradition, and your own increasingly fluent sense of motion. You realize with a soft internal cuckle that the most important tool you're using right now is attention, not sharp, anxious attention, but wide, relaxed attention, the kind that notices without grabbing. You stay there, standing gently, letting the sea do most of the work.
You think back to how any of this ever made sense in the first place, because no one is born standing confidently on a moving canoe in open ocean, casually reading swells like subtitles. This calm competence had to be grown, slowly and deliberately, and you remember how that growth felt. Teaching here never arrived as a formal lesson with a start and end time. It seeped in sideways, through stories told while repairing nets, through games played on the shore, through long stretches of watching before anyone trusted you to do. Mainstream historical accounts agree that Maori knowledge transmission was intergenerational and experiential. Children learned by observing elders long before they were expected to perform. You remember standing near the water as a child, feeling waves slap at your ankles while someone older pointed, not explaining, just pointing at the horizon, at birds, at clouds. Watch, they'd say. And that was the lesson. Watch until watching becomes knowing. Quirky tidbit time, some teaching games involved guessing where unseen objects were drifting offshore based on wave movement alone. It sounds like an oddly specific party trick, but it trained attention beautifully. Joke number 1 floats in gently. Hide and seek, but the ocean is it, and it always wins. Stories did most of the heavy lifting, not lectures, stories. A tale about an ancestor's voyage would include a casual mention of a star rising too early, or a bird that appeared when it shouldn't have. Those details weren't highlighted. They waited patiently for your brain to circle back years later and say, oh, that's what that meant. Historians still argue whether these narratives were intentionally encoded teaching tools or simply rich storytelling that happened to contain instruction. You suspect the answer is yes. You were never rushed. That's the part that stands out now.
No one checked your progress or asked you to demonstrate mastery on a schedule. If you weren't ready, you weren't ready. Pressure would only make you stiff, and stiffness kills sensitivity. You remember elders smiling knowingly when you asked too many questions at once. "You'll feel it later," they'd say. Annoying at the time, comforting now. You shift your stance slightly as the waka moves, and it feels familiar, like a gesture you've made thousands of times. That familiarity didn't come from explanation, it came from repetition. Mainstream learning science backs this up in a satisfying way. Skills involving perception and balance are best learned implicitly through doing rather than explicit instruction. You nod inwardly, pleased when modern research accidentally agrees with ancient patience. There's humor in how indirect the teaching could be. Someone might deliberately let you make a small mistake, nothing dangerous, just enough to feel the consequences. The waka would yaw slightly off course, the swell pressure would change, and you'd feel discomfort before anyone said a word. Joke number 2 drifts in, feedback so immediate it doesn't need commentary. The ocean is very efficient that way. Historians still debate how much navigational knowledge was restricted by status or lineage. Some accounts suggest only select individuals were trained deeply, while others imply broader communal familiarity with wayfinding principles. Standing here, you suspect layers again. Not everyone needed to navigate across vast distances, but everyone benefited from understanding the sea. Knowledge spreads naturally when survival depends on it. You remember learning the names of winds not as abstract terms, but as personalities with habits. This wind arrives grumpy in the morning. That one lies down at sunset. It sounds playful, but it's practical. Personification makes memory sticky. Quirky tidbit number 2, winds were sometimes teased in stories, blamed for delays or thanked for cooperation. Joke number 3 slips in, even the weather gets customer feedback. Practice sessions were often quiet, long stretches of standing, paddling, listening. Silence wasn't empty, it was instructional. When someone finally spoke, it mattered. "Feel that?" they'd ask. And because nothing else had distracted you, you did. You really did. That moment of shared awareness felt like being let into a secret, even though the secret was just paying attention. Your muscles learned before your mind trusted them. That's common. You'd adjust course instinctively, then hesitate, doubting yourself. Elders would notice and say nothing, letting the waka confirm your choice by settling into smoother motion. Mainstream accounts of apprenticeship often mention this delayed confidence. The body acts correctly before the learner believes it. You smile softly, recognizing the pattern from other parts of life. Historians still argue about how long full training took. Estimates range from years to decades, depending on distance and complexity. Out here, time feels like the wrong unit. Training lasted until readiness appeared. That's all. No graduation ceremony, no certificate. One day, someone simply trusted you with more responsibility. That trust was the test. You feel the weight of that trust now, even as you relax into the movement. Teaching wasn't about control, it was about continuity. Each generation held the knowledge temporarily, shaping it, then passing it on. The ocean didn't change its rules to accommodate forgetfulness. People had to remember, together. There's a lightness in that memory, too. Learning wasn't joyless. There were jokes, teasing, friendly competition. "You missed that swell," someone might say, grinning. "Didn't miss it, I was just letting it pass." Joke number 4 drifts by, excuses are timeless. As the waka continues, you realize that teaching never really ended. Even now, you're learning, refining, adjusting, noticing subtleties you missed before. That's comforting. Mastery here isn't a finish line. It's a relationship that keeps evolving. Historians still debate whether any navigator was ever considered complete. You suspect not. Completion would imply stopping, and nothing about the sea suggests stopping is a good idea. Your attention softens again, balanced between memory and sensation. The lessons of childhood aren't separate from the journey. They're woven into every movement. You feel gratitude for the patience that allowed this knowledge to grow without pressure. The waka glides on, carrying not just you, but generations of watching, waiting, and learning how to listen properly.
You become aware, in a slow and almost sleepy way, that not everyone agrees on exactly how all of this worked. The sea doesn't mind disagreement, but humans love it. And you can almost hear the voices of scholars drifting alongside the waka, murmuring theories while trying not to tip anything over. You keep your balance and listen, because debates, like swells, can be useful if you don't fight them. Mainstream history is firm on one point. Maori ancestors reached Aotearoa intentionally, using advanced navigational knowledge. Accidental drift doesn't explain repeated voyages, return trips, or the successful transport of people, plants, and animals. That much is settled. Where things get gently wobbly is in the details. Exactly how precise were the routes? How standardized were the techniques? How much was shared across Polynesia, and how much was uniquely local? Historians still argue whether navigators followed fixed highways across the ocean or whether routes shifted seasonally, flexing with winds and currents. Standing here, you suspect flexibility again. Fixed routes make sense for teaching, but the ocean isn't a road. It's more like a conversation partner who occasionally changes the subject. You adjust to that naturally, without needing a footnote. You remember hearing one debate about star knowledge, whether navigators memorized exact rising and setting points or worked with broader star groupings and relative motion. Some researchers favor precision, others emphasize pattern recognition. You smile faintly because both camps sound familiar. Precision lives inside pattern here. You don't separate them, you let them overlap. Quirky tidbit time. Early European observers sometimes dismissed indigenous navigation as guesswork because they couldn't see the tools. That misunderstanding lingered longer than it should have. Joke number one drifts in. If you can't see the spreadsheet, clearly no planning happened. You let the irony pass quietly. You shift your stance as the waka rolls, grounding yourself again in sensation. Debate is interesting, but the sea remains the final examiner. No theory matters if it doesn't work out here. That's something both elders and scientists eventually agree on, even if they phrase it differently. Another scholarly argument floats by, whether certain cues, like sensing reflected swells from land, are physically detectable at long distances, or whether stories compress multiple observations into one poetic explanation. Historians still argue whether these accounts should be read literally or metaphorically. You listen politely, then glance at the water. The pattern does feel slightly more complex than earlier. Whether that complexity has one cause or many doesn't change how you respond. You stay aligned. You think about memory again, how chance might encode routes with surprising accuracy. Some researchers believe these chants functioned almost like algorithms, reliably producing correct outcomes when followed. Others argue they were more mnemonic, flexible guides rather than strict instructions. You feel the answer in your body, strict enough to orient you, loose enough to adapt. That's not a compromise, it's a feature. Joke number two surfaces gently. This is why arguing in comments rarely improves navigation. You smile and let the thought dissolve into the rhythm of the sea. You recall debates about scale, too. Did every navigator possess the same depth of knowledge, or were there specialists whose expertise far exceeded the average? Oral histories suggest specialists existed, revered for their skill. At the same time, general ocean literacy was widespread. Historians still debate how these layers interacted. Out here, it feels obvious. Specialists lead, communities support, knowledge flows between them. The waka creaks softly, reminding you that while humans debate, materials quietly do their job. You appreciate that. The boat doesn't care which theory you favor, as long as you stand properly and don't panic. That feels like good design philosophy. A fringe tidbit drifts up. Some modern reconstructions of Polynesian voyages initially failed because researchers underestimated how relaxed navigators needed to be. Too much tension led to poor interpretation of cues. It took time and humility to realize that calm was not optional. Joke number 3 slides in. Stress is a terrible co-navigator. You notice how these debates never seem to threaten the knowledge itself. Whether scholars agree or not, the methods persist, practiced by those who learn them directly. That resilience is telling. Mainstream anthropology often points out that living traditions don't require external validation to function. You nod inwardly, content with that. Historians still argue about lost techniques, whether certain methods vanished due to colonization, disruption, or changing needs. That thought brings a brief heaviness, but it doesn't linger. Knowledge adapts. Some strands thin, others strengthen. The sea remains, offering the same cues it always has. You feel the waka settle into a particularly smooth glide, as if affirming that whatever uncertainties exist in books, this moment works. You breathe out slowly, letting scholarly voices fade into the background hum of water and wind. Debate has its place. It sharpens understanding, challenges assumptions. But out here, under an open sky, certainty feels less important than competence. You don't need to resolve every argument to keep moving. You just need to listen well enough. As the sun continues its slow climb, you return your focus fully to sensation. The ocean doesn't ask you to take sides. It asks you to pay attention. You do. And that, more than any conclusion, feels like the point.
You feel the journey shift in tone. Not abruptly, just enough to notice. The cues you've been following don't disappear, they multiply. New swells mingle with the old. Winds change their texture, and the horizon seems to offer more variation than it did before. This is what happens when you move into unfamiliar waters. You don't abandon what you know, you adapt it. Mainstream history notes that Maori navigators didn't stop navigating once Aotearoa was settled. Coastal travel, river mouths, and inter-island routes demanded constant adjustment. You imagine the first encounters with new shorelines, different reef patterns, unfamiliar winds funneling through valleys, birds behaving just slightly differently than expected. Navigation didn't freeze at arrival, it evolved immediately. You test your balance again as the swell angles change. The dominant rhythm is still there, but it's joined by shorter waves reflecting off distant landforms. You remember the teaching. New environments speak with accents. Same language, different emphasis. You listen longer before responding. Joke number 1 drifts in. Even the ocean has regional dialects. Birds appear again, not the same species you watched earlier. Their flight paths are lower, more erratic, feeding close to shore, perhaps. You note it without excitement. Adaptation requires calm. Quirky tidbit time. Some navigators reportedly adjusted expectations for bird behavior based on island ecology, knowing that different landscapes produce different avian schedules. Historians still argue how formalized this knowledge was, but flexibility seems undeniable. You think about encounters with other peoples, trading, sharing stories, sometimes learning new routes. Oral traditions across Polynesia show overlapping star knowledge with local variations. Mainstream scholarship supports this networked exchange, suggesting navigation knowledge flowed between cultures rather than remaining isolated. You like that image, roots not as secrets, but as shared understandings refined by experience. The waka responds to a slight course change, gliding more smoothly. You didn't calculate it, you felt resistance ease. That's enough. You smile faintly, satisfied. Joke number 2 floats by. Sometimes the best confirmation is when things stop complaining. Historians still argue whether long-distance return voyages were common or exceptional. Could navigators reliably sail back against prevailing winds, or were some journeys one way? Evidence suggests both occurred, depending on season and route. Out here, certainty isn't binary. You plan for return when conditions allow, and you adapt when they don't. The ocean doesn't grade intentions, only responses. You notice how memory updates itself. Earlier chants still apply, but you mentally annotate them. This part changes near this coast, that star matters more in this season. Memory isn't static, it's versioned. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some traditions describe navigators deliberately sailing experimental routes to test conditions, expanding communal knowledge. Joke number 3 slips in, beta testing, but with waves. As land draws nearer, still unseen but strongly implied, you sense a different energy in the water. Currents tug subtly sideways, influenced by shore contours. You compensate without fuss. Mainstream coastal navigation studies confirm that these lateral currents intensify near land. You nod internally, appreciating when lived experience and textbooks accidentally agree. You reflect on how adaptable this system is. It doesn't collapse when conditions change, it thrives. Historians still debate whether this adaptation was consciously taught or emerged naturally through practice. You suspect it was modeled rather than explained. Elders adapted, learners copied, no manifesto required. Another bird crosses low over the water, then banks sharply. You store the movement. Everything here feels slightly busier, more conversational. The sea has more to say near land. You listen without rushing it. Joke number 4 drifts in gently. The ocean gets chatty when it's close to home. You let the thought dissolve, focusing instead on keeping alignment amidst complexity. You realize that adaptation isn't just about environment, it's about people. Knowledge shifts as communities shift, as needs change. River navigation differs from open ocean. Fishing routes differ from migration routes. Navigation is always contextual. That's why it survived. Rigid systems break. Responsive ones bend. Historians still argue how much was lost and how much transformed over time. But transformation isn't failure, it's continuity under new conditions. You feel that continuity now, standing on a waka that carries old principles into a slightly different present. The swell pattern smooths again, suggesting you've adjusted correctly. The waka seems content. You breathe out, letting your shoulders drop. Adaptation complete, for now. Ahead, land feels closer. Not announced, just present. You don't strain to see it. Seeing will happen soon enough. For now, you keep listening, adapting, and trusting that the same principles that brought you this far will carry you the rest of the way.
Land finally makes itself known without announcing its name. Not a shape yet, more a pressure. The air feels steadier, less restless. Swells soften, losing some of their long-distance authority. You don't celebrate. Arrival isn't a moment, it's a process. You stand quietly, letting the cues confirm one another. Birds are more frequent now, flying with purpose instead of curiosity. Their paths intersect rather than wander. You've been taught that this matters. Near land, birds stop improvising. They commute. Mainstream archaeology supports this idea in an indirect way. Coastal settlement patterns across Polynesia suggest that navigators could reliably sense land before sighting it, reducing the risk of overshooting islands. You imagine the confidence that comes from that, not loud confidence, but the kind that doesn't need reassurance. The water smells different, not dramatically, just enough to register. Organic, warmer, more layered. You breathe in slowly. This isn't magic, it's biology. Runoff, reefs,
microscopic life. Still, knowing the explanation doesn't remove the calm, it deepens it. Joke number 1 drifts by softly. Land has a scent profile, and the ocean respects it. Clouds ahead behave differently. They stack instead of stretching, lingering rather than racing past. You remember the lesson. Clouds anchor over land because the land feeds them heat and moisture. Meteorologists say the same thing centuries later. You nod again at that accidental agreement between ancestors and satellites. You adjust course just slightly, not because you must, but because everything suggests it. The waka responds with less resistance than before. That's your confirmation. No applause needed. You think about arrival rituals. Some traditions describe songs or chants spoken before landfall, acknowledging the journey rather than the destination. Historians debate how widespread these practices were, but the logic feels sound. The journey deserves closure. You offer one quietly, internally. No words needed. The shoreline begins to resolve, first as contrast, then as texture, dark against lighter sky. You don't rush your eyes. You let them adapt, the same way your body adapted to swells earlier. Seeing is just another skill that improves with patience. You reflect on how this navigation system resists drama. There's no single heroic moment, no sudden revelation, just accumulation, small confirmations stacking until certainty feels inevitable. Modern storytelling often wants sharper edges. This method prefers continuity. Joke number 2 floats in. If suspense were a wave, this system would smooth it out. As you near the coast, currents grow more complex. You feel sideways pulls, circular eddies. You counter them instinctively, guided by the way the waka tilts and corrects itself. Coastal hydrodynamics textbooks would approve. They'd also overcomplicate it. You notice how quiet your thoughts have become, not empty, just orderly. Navigation does that. It narrows attention without stress. Researchers studying traditional wayfinding note its meditative qualities, though they struggle to quantify them. You understand why. Some things are felt, not graphed. The seabed begins to influence the water's color. Subtle greens, shifting blues. Reefs announce themselves before they appear. You steer to respect them. Respect is practical. Ignore reefs, and they educate you quickly. You slow the approach. Arrival doesn't mean stopping awareness. If anything, it demands more. Rocks, shallows, changing winds near cliffs. The ocean doesn't relax just because land is pleasant. It gets specific. Joke number 3 arrives gently. The ocean becomes detail-oriented near shore. You guide the waka into calmer water, where waves lose their urgency. The motion changes from rolling to rocking. Different rhythm, same conversation. You listen until the boat feels settled. Then you let yourself acknowledge it. You've arrived, not at a point, but at a state. The journey doesn't end. It folds into what comes next. Fishing routes, coastal travel, teaching others. Navigation shifts from discovery to familiarity. Historians still argue how often these landfalls were planned versus opportunistic. You suspect the distinction mattered less than we think. Planning and opportunity aren't opposites out here. They're collaborators. You step onto land, feeling how solid it is compared to the moving world you've been reading for days. The contrast is grounding. You look back once, not nostalgically, just appreciatively. The ocean hasn't gone anywhere. It never does. You know you'll return to it, not because you must, but because listening becomes a habit. Once learned, it doesn't fade. It waits. The waka rests. The stars will rise again tonight, whether you need them or not. You smile slightly, already knowing their positions. And for the first time since setting out, you allow yourself to stop navigating. without losing the skill.